Hey everybody, and welcome to our Family Forms Clinic training. Everything you ever wanted to know about forms, and a bunch of things you didn't even know you wanted to know. This training is primarily for our undergraduate interns and our community volunteers. However, law students are welcome to view this as well as supplemental training. Before we dig into this, what we're going to do with this training is I'm going to break it into 3 videos. So if you're watching them in order, this is going to be the first video where we're going to talk about the basics of the Family Forms Clinic. So all of the administrative stuff you need to know about dress code and how to get your hours reported and how to tell us if you're not going to be there and stuff like that. The next video, we'll talk a bit about communicating with clients and making the most out of the interview time you have with them. And then that third video, we'll go ahead and talk about some of the nitty-gritty procedural stuff about how the every day of the clinic will run and how you fill out forms and things like that. So hopefully, if things go well, we should be in the ballpark of 3 to 3.5 hours for all 3 videos together. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into this one then. So as I said, this is clinic basics. A lot of folks are going to want to skip this one, but don't, because these are really important things, right? This is how to get credit for your internship, how to get to your internship, things you may need to know about the courthouse, how not to annoy your supervisors. So really important little detail stuff. Everything else you do in the clinic is going to build on getting these pieces right. I always like to start with this notice, so this is important information. I'm sure those of you who were going to not watch this video have already clicked off, but for those of you who are on the fence trying to decide if you want to watch this, you're expected to be familiar with all of this stuff. So if you don't follow these procedures, or you didn't know that was how you reported an absence, or your hours aren't recorded correctly, our expectation is that you know the stuff in this training. And so if you skip the video, or if you leave for part of it, or if you aren't paying attention and then you don't follow the rules, that's something that we can consider in our reviews, our recommendations, things like that. So again, this is your notice that I get to hold you liable for everything that is in these training videos. So make sure that you do review everything. That's not to say that your supervisors are going to be angry if you don't remember every single bit of this, but you should keep this training materials somewhere. So if you ever need to, say, report an absence, you know what the procedure is, and you should watch the whole thing so you can hit the ground running on day 1. All right, but enough of my fun warnings. Let's get into the actual information that you guys need. So the first thing we're going to talk about is dress code. Our dress code at the MJC is pretty relaxed. I like to think of it as casual plus, right? So jeans are okay, but make sure they're, if you'll forgive the term, nice jeans, right? We don't want holes in the knees. We don't want ones that are torn up. I don't want ones that sag down to your ankles, right? Nice jeans that fit reasonably well. You can wear t-shirts. They can't advertise things. So we are looking for plain t-shirts, or if you prefer, you can wear a t-shirt with your university name or logo on it. So again, plain t-shirts, no bare shoulders, no midriffs, no shorts. Again, that's the casual plus part about this is, jeans and t-shirts are kind of the floor level. I always ask myself the question, would my grandmother be embarrassed to see me in this? If your grandma is super relaxed, then would my grandmother be embarrassed to see you in this? Or would she go, oh my God, humanity's doomed? Or would she go, oh, what a nice young person? So sort of from that framework. And when you're thinking about dressing, just keep in mind that you may run into judges, lawyers, lots of other important people in the courthouse. So you want to look reasonably nice. Again, you don't have to wear a 3-piece suit every day. You don't have to wear cocktail dresses or anything like that. But you do want to look relatively nice. So again, casual plus is the standard we're looking for with the dress code. Absences. I have 2 whole slides dedicated to absences, which tells you how important it is to follow these rules. Like, if you take nothing else away from the clinic basics section, please make note of how to record absences. So When you are going to be absent, we want you to send an email to mjcdivorce@gmail.com. So that's Mike, Juliet, Charlie, divorce@gmail.com. We want you to send a notice as soon as you know you're going to be absent. A lot of people will send an email like 5 minutes before clinic starts. That's not super helpful for us. Obviously, if you're sick or you get in a car wreck, you might not know more than 24 hours ahead of time, but we would like to know as soon as possible because we do base our numbers of appointments and our numbers of forms off the number of students we expect. And so if you aren't there, there may be people who we have scheduled an appointment for who we actually can't see. And so the sooner you let us know you won't be there, the better. Within that email we're asking you to send, make sure that you include the day, date, service, and shift that you're going to miss. And I know that sounds like a lot. You're like, wait, what? But some of you have different things you're involved in. So some of you might be involved in, say, the expungement pardon clinic or the adult guardianship forms clinic, or maybe you're just in the family forms clinic. And our supervisors don't always remember which shift you have when. So it's really helpful if you can say, I'm going to miss my shift on Tuesday, the 6th of September, right? And that's my morning family form shift. That's really helpful for us because we immediately know who needs to know this information, what day it is. We don't have to go look up your schedule. I know that seems like a little thing, but it is so much better for somebody to say, I'm going to miss my morning shift on this date, right? And it's for family forms, than to just have someone say, hey, I won't be in on Tuesday. Because then I have to go, okay, which shift is it? Is it the morning, the afternoon? Is it family forms? Is it adult guardianships? And so it just is easier for us if you can provide that information for us, because you know it, and our supervisors often will have to look that up. So moving on to the next bit here. I'm sorry, my cat is joining the conversation. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but anyway, so for those of you who do this internship for credit, when you send us the email saying, hey, I'm not going to make a shift, we want you to include a proposal about how you're going to make up your hours. If you know that you are not going to need these hours, so if you're scheduled to get 125 hours and you only need 96, then you can just say, I don't anticipate that I will need to make these hours up. But otherwise, we want you to say, like, I'm going to need to pick up an extra shift, or I actually have stayed late a couple of shifts, so I'm okay. Make sure that you include that. It's not so much that I need you to have planned out 6 weeks in advance what shift you're going to pick up, but it's really important that you think about that. I can't tell you how many times we have somebody who comes to me 2 weeks before the semester ends and they say, hey, bad news, I need to get 50 hours. How can I do that? And I'm like, yeah, unless you can work full time, you can't. And so this is mostly a reminder for you and a confirmation for us that if you do this for credit, you are thinking about that and that you have looked at your hours and planned for it. Because again, if you come to us and say, I need 50 hours in the last couple of weeks, it's probably not going to happen. And we want to make sure that we are checking for that. For those of you who don't do it for credit, you can just say, I don't do this for credit, so I don't need to make up the hours. Just as a little bit of a weird reminder, for the absences, generally, we see this as you're telling us when you're not going to be there. This is an unpaid internship, and so, when you say, hey, is it okay if somebody may send you back great, we received this, but you may get no response at all. And you get to assume that your request is approved unless you hear otherwise. Again, I know that's counterintuitive, but it's the way we've set up, and it's just easier for us to go, okay, they have told me they're not going to be there. So it may not be what you're used to from your normal work places, but that's how we do it. So again, I'll get people who say like, hey, can you answer my email because I have to book my flight? And that's just not, it was approved unless you heard otherwise. So just kind of keep in mind that that's how we approach it. So you may not get a response. For those of you who are worried about, well, how will anyone know I sent it? You should get an automated response from MJC Divorce. The automated response is largely meant for clients, but that can serve as your confirmation that you sent an email. And again, just in another format. Again, absences are a big thing, like reporting them. Report them correctly. It makes our lives a lot easier as supervisors. But a few things, just make sure that you are not no call, no showing. It says don't do it more than once on the sheet here, but don't do it ever. Everybody gets a mulligan, but please don't no call, no show. That is the worst. That is worse than sending me an email 5 minutes beforehand. Make sure within that I always get somebody who will say, hey, I'm not going to be here next week. And I say something like, uh-huh. And then when they don't show up the next week, I have no idea where they are, because I, like the rest of our supervisors, don't retain things well orally. So make sure that you are sending the email. Even if you told the supervisor, assume they will forget and go ahead and send that email anyway. And then again, make sure that you are letting us know ahead of time as often as you can. If you're sending an email less than 24 hours ahead of time and it's not an emergency, that's going to count as a no call, no show. So, so some situations where you might be emailing us within 24 hours, I'm sick. So again, just wanted to let you know I won't make my shift because I woke up and I'm sick this morning. I got in a car accident this morning. These are sudden things that came up that you couldn't have foreseen. I've had some people who are like, oh yeah, I couldn't let you know because it turns out I'm in Hawaii. No, my flight didn't get canceled. I'm just in Hawaii, right? So just make sure that, again, if you know ahead of time, let us know ahead of time. Do not tell us orally. Can't emphasize that enough. We will not remember. Another thing just to keep an eye on is the MJC is only closed when the county courthouse is closed, or if we give you notice that we are going to be closed. So don't assume that the Justice Center is closed just because you have off from school. Really common one is fall break. So go ahead and take a look at your school academic schedules and make sure any breaks you plan not to be here, if you have a shift, you're checking to see if we're open and letting us know if you won't be there. Do keep up with your hours. Again, I hope that you all can handle that. We'll talk about that a little more. We also ask that you don't miss the equivalent of 2 weeks worth of shifts or more during the semester unless you have gotten prior written consent from either the legal director or one of the other supervisors. All right, so I've done my fun thing about absences. So now talk just for a minute about major schedule changes. You're also going to send those major schedule changes to mjcdivorce@gmail.com. So again, a major schedule change is if, say, you're permanently adding or dropping a shift, or if you're dropping the internship entirely, or if you need to make big changes. You were Tuesday, Thursday, but now you want to be Monday, Wednesday. Your major schedule change is not approved until you hear back from us. Obviously, if you're saying I'm dropping the internship and I'm never coming back, I guess we can't stop you. But if you're saying I used to do Tuesday, Thursday, now I want to do Monday, Wednesday, those sort of changes aren't approved until you hear back from somebody. If it's something where you've sent an email and you haven't heard back yet, you can always check in with your supervisor and say, hey, I sent an email. Has anyone had a chance to look at that? But just, be aware of that. And that also, I think, is a good reminder to, again, leave a lot of time. It could take us a little while to get back to you. So don't say, hey, I need to change my schedule starting tomorrow. Again, whenever possible. Recording your hours. So for those of you that need credit for this, obviously recording your hours is how we're going to keep track of your hours so that a supervisor can sign off on your timesheets or whatever materials that you need to get approved in order to get credit or to get your grant, stipend, or whatever sort of things you may have us signing off for. For those of you who don't do this for credit, recording your hours is still an important thing for two reasons. First of all, it's important for us as an organization. Talking about how many people volunteer with us and how many hours they put in is an important part of the narrative that we use on grants and things when we are applying for money to keep the MJC running and to keep us serving the folks here in Milwaukee. So it's important for us, but it's also important for you too. When we're writing recommendations and things, it's a much more powerful story to say this person did 150 hours in our clinic over a semester than it is to say they were here a bunch, right? So those sort of specifics can be very helpful when we're writing recommendations. When we're doing law school recommendation letters. It can also be helpful if we have to do employment verifications in the future, because we will get people, whether you loved or hated your experience, where they'll make you list anywhere where you worked or volunteered, and then they'll have us verify dates and hours and things like that. So we want to keep an accurate record of your hours. In order to do that, what we do is you sign in at the start of a shift for any shift that is in person. So all family form shifts are in person. All adult guardianship shifts are in person. If you do expungement pardon clinic, they have their own way of tracking your hours. So you won't necessarily sign in for that. So you sign in at the start of the shift. Ideally, we want you to also sign out when you leave, but you definitely have to sign in. If you don't sign in for a shift, it's possible you will not get credit for your time. If we can't remember if you were there, or if there's some discrepancy down the line, if you didn't sign in, you don't get credit for that shift. So make sure you're signing in. The sign-in is located when you first enter the Milwaukee Justice Center. It's located sort of off to the right, across from the whiteboard and across from the entrance to the front desk. On your first shift, someone will show you where it's located. As far as credit, you get credit for the entire shift as long as you were available for the whole time. So what that means is that if you're scheduled to be there from 8:30 until noon, and at 11:30 I tell you I don't need you anymore and you're free to go, you still get credit until noon because you set aside that time, you were available. It is not your fault that I didn't have enough work for you to do until noon. The only exception to that is if you know that your internship, if you're doing it for credit or again for a stipend or something like that, if you know that they will not allow that, then you can't credit it. But anything else, if they're okay with it, that's our policy and we're okay with it. And you also get credit if you go over. So if you're scheduled from 8:30 to noon and you don't get done until 12:30, you get credit for that extra half hour. So you get either the scheduled length of your shift or the actual time you spent, whichever is more. The only exception to this general rule is that if you have, I'm sorry, my cat is joining us again, and so I'm going to pause to move the fur ball. All right, sorry, back to where we were. The only exception to this general rule is if you have a situation where you have told us you're not available for the whole time. So if you're scheduled normally from 8:30 until noon, and you come in and you tell me, hey, I have to be done at 11:30. And then it turns out I let you go at 11:15 because I didn't have anyone for you. You only get credit until 11:30 because that's when you told me you had to leave. And I know sometimes people say, well, that's not fair at all. It's, it makes me want to gamble on whether or not I'll get out early. But it is because my numbers are influenced by when you tell me you're going to leave. So it's possible you got done at 11:15 because when I was considering my numbers for the shift, you being done at 11:30 made the numbers lower. So that, I know that's getting a little technical, but that's why it is set up that way. So we obviously still want you to let us know when you're not available, because otherwise we're going to be really miffed when it's 11:30 and you say, oh, just kidding, I have to go. So do make sure you give us that information, but the downside is you only get credit up till the point where you told us you had to leave. You can actually check your hours in Visas. It is our record-keeping system. You can use this website here, this marquette.visaslive.com. And that link should also be in the training materials. And you can check your hours there. You shouldn't be able to self-enter your hours, but you can go ahead and check them. Your Visas name is your email address. Your password is also your email address, and you can change it once you log in. At least a couple of you are going to check this the day after this training gets sent out. We don't always get your accounts set up until right before the clinic starts. So if you're scheduled to start, say, the 28th of August, then we may not have it set up until maybe the 25th of August or the 27th of August if we're really running behind. So don't panic if you watch this training and then you go to Visas and you're not able to log in. Usually we will send you an email that's just saying, hey, your account's been set up. Double check your schedule to make sure it looks right. If you have trouble logging into Visas or any issues with our record keeping system in Visas, please contact mjcdivorce@gmail.com. I'm going to be honest with you. Almost all the time, if you need to contact the Justice Center, it's going to be through that email. The reason why I say that specifically is on that Visas homepage, it says, if you have trouble, please contact Marquette University at blah, blah, blah. That is because we share this resource with Marquette's law school, but if you contact that email, they won't know who you are. And it will take a long time for that information to get to the supervisors and the legal director here at the Milwaukee Justice Center. So make sure that you are sending those emails to MJC Divorce or to the legal director or a supervisor that you are instructed to send something to. All right, so we've gotten out of sort of the major administrative things. One other thing to be conscious about when you're working in the MJC is confidentiality. So we, in our clinics, have access to some confidential information. Hopefully, by this point, all of you saw those, the confidentiality agreement that was attached to the original offer email. Within that, it's talking about the fact that we have access to some materials that aren't public access. And so, and even beyond the materials you'll see in CCAP, clients are going to give you a lot of personal information to help fill out the forms. And so confidentiality for us takes a few different levels. The first is the very obvious level. Don't misuse client information. Don't take client information. Do not use the information the clients provide you or that you get from CCAP for any purpose other than helping them fill out the forms. And at the end of a session, make sure that you are getting rid of that information. So make sure that you are putting any names, addresses, socials, anything with confidential information or identifying information, make sure that you're putting in one of the shred bins that are located throughout the clinic. The CCAP that we have access to, as I've mentioned quite a bit, has a little bit deeper access, and some of the information there is confidential. So one thing you're all going to be tempted to do is at some point you will be sitting with a client and they're going to say, I don't know the other person's address. And the supervisor, or you're just going to know, is going to say, well, they have to have that address for this to work. And the client's going to tell you, well, you have it. It's in the case file. Just go get it. And even though I'm going to tell you right now, do not go get it. Some of you will try and go get it. And hopefully a supervisor will see you and stop you. So let me just be super clear. We do not give out address information from that back CCAP. The computer that we have access to, that CCAP computer, there are a whole bunch of rules about what can be given out when and where. To simplify that so that you guys don't have to know all of those rules when you're already having to learn all this more complicated stuff, our policy is just we don't give out address information or information from that record beyond what the order is ever. And so I know that seems harsh, but it's one of those where it's just the policy we have as a clinic. You can certainly, if you're trying to figure out where to get an address, try the public CCAP. You can talk to our supervisors. We definitely have some tips and tricks for how to get information or what other options a client might have. But make sure we are not giving out the information from that internal CCAP, because that is part of how we keep confidentiality as a clinic. Make sure that you're really familiar with what you can give out and what you can't from the internal CCAP. If you're ever not sure, check in with a supervisor. No crisis has ever started with a student saying, hey, I just wanted to check. I'm allowed to give them this information, right? The last bit of confidentiality is making sure that we are protecting our client identities. because in addition to protecting the confidential information we have access to, we also want to make sure that we are protecting even that clients are coming to see us. We don't want to accidentally reveal who has sought our services or what they have sought our services for. And so that means that we hope that you will discuss your experiences with the MJC. Like, we hope you enjoy it and you want to tell your friends about it. But when you're discussing those experiences, make sure that you aren't using clients' names, or that you're not using enough detail that somebody who knew the client could figure out who you're talking about, right? So if I'm talking to my friend about a really exciting client I had today, I'll say, today when I was at the MJC, I was working with a client and their spouse actually lived out of the country. And so we were having to figure out, how could they get this person served? Were they going to, were they going to have their spouse sign something, or were they going to have their spouse, served through the local law enforcement in that country? And it was really interesting, right? That's sort of the, yes, you should do it that way. The way you shouldn't do it is, I definitely shouldn't say, hey, Joe Schmo was in the clinic today, and man, his situation is weird because his wife Barbara lives in Ghana, and we were trying to figure out, like, how do you even serve somebody in Ghana, because she lives at 1234 West Nowhere Street, but I guess that they don't really have a mailbox. Like, that's a lot of detail, right? Anybody who knows these people is going to know who they are, even if I hadn't used their names. That, the address and that's more specific. So again, make sure that you are not editing precisely, but being conscious about how you speak, that it is in sort of general terms and not in really specific terms that could reveal who you're talking about. Last but not least, in that same frame of talking about, not exposing client information, when you are done with a client and you've filled out all of the Salesforce and notes programs you need to, don't worry if you don't know what those are, we'll talk about them later. Make sure that you are exiting out of any forms you completed, and that you aren't searching through our Salesforce database, our client database, in front of clients, because the forms obviously have information from other clients written on them. And the Salesforce database, again, it will show you anyone who meets those search results. And so you want to make sure that you are not accidentally giving away client information. Something that comes up from time to time, conflicts of interest. For those very, very limited number of you who are attorneys, the normal conflicts of interest do apply. So all of the attorney rules apply. For those of you who aren't attorneys, which is the vast majority of you, as far as conflicts of interest, so we often see both parties in a case. And any of you who've had a legal internship of some kind might say, oh, in my internship, we weren't allowed to do that. Because the MJC isn't providing legal advice, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, we are allowed to see both parties in a case, and that's okay. But to avoid the appearance of a conflict or anything like that, we don't let the same individual volunteer work with both sides of a case. So if you sit down with a client and you realize, oh, wow, I think I worked with their spouse, or I worked with their ex, I worked with the other party in this case, make sure that you let the supervisor know so that we can switch you out and have somebody else work with the person, so that there isn't even the appearance that we might have a conflict. Every now and then, you may run into a client who you know from outside the Justice Center. If it's somebody who you know socially, it's a friend, it's a cousin, it's one of your classmates, it's whatever, do let the supervisor know. Those situations can be complicated. I know we've had situations where the client was actually more comfortable working with their cousin because, they weren't airing their dirty laundry to someone they didn't know. But you definitely want to loop in a supervisor, because when those things come up, ideally we want to split you up from somebody who you know. But if it is a situation where maybe they are more comfortable, we want to be able to verify for ourselves that we are meeting all of the requirements we have for those situations. So make sure you're letting a supervisor know if you know the client. And last but not least, if you run into a client you've worked with in a legal context, you definitely want to work with the supervisor, because even if you're not an attorney, if you've worked with them in a legal context, there may be some specific ethical and conflicts of interest considerations that we need to have. So again, rather than make you know all of those rules, the rule is check in with the attorney so that we can make sure that we are doing everything we need to do in that situation. Last but not least, just a little bit about our in-person clinic. So again, the Family Forms Clinic and the Adult Guardianship Clinic are both in person at the courthouse. The Expungement Pardon Clinic is remote. Those of you who do expungement pardon will get separate information about that. But for those of you who are coming in person to the courthouse is located at 901 North 9th Street. And when you enter the courthouse, you're going to go through a security screening, pretty similar to like the kinds of screenings you would go through at the airport. There is a lovely long list of things you aren't allowed to bring into the courthouse. You can find the full list at this Milwaukee Sheriff's site, but just some general ones you may want to know about that have caught our volunteers in the past. You can't bring combs with pointy tips. You can't bring silverware. The website says it can't be metal silverware, but I have heard occasionally I've had people say they took my plastic silverware as well. We've had students have their nail clippers taken, their bottle openers, corkscrews, even if they are on a keychain, nail clippers, nail files. So lots of different things that might be taken. Usually, just make sure you've taken a quick look at that list. Make sure you don't have anything like that with you. Because when you go through the security screening, if they determine you can't take it into the building, if you either have to go take it out to your car or take it back to your house or something, because if they confiscate it, they won't give it back. It's not like you can give it to them and grab it when you come out. If they take it, you never get it back. All right, well, that is all for our clinic basics. Hopefully I haven't put too many of you to sleep. We're going to take a brief pause, depending on how long it takes you to start up the next video. And then in the next video, we will get into some of the more substantive parts of the clinic. All right, see you guys for the next one.